Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In chapter 13 of book 2 of Epictetus Discourses, we find him engaged in a very interesting discussion that seems to center around what we translate as anxiety. The Greek term for it is Agonia, word we get agony from. But it also concerns some other matters as well that are closely connected, including expertise and how we can rely upon that and how far it can take us. So let's talk first about anxiety itself. And I want to say something really important from the start, which is that oftentimes if we use the term anxiety in the 21st century context, a lot of people will think automatically, okay, anxiety is something different than fear because existentialism has taught us that, or psychology has taught us that, usually influenced by existentialism. And anxiety is supposed to be this broader state that doesn't really have any particular thing that it's afraid of. It just has a general comportment, and fears are always very specific. Epictetus doesn't have all that baggage built into that, and it's not going to be particularly helpful to import those ideas in there. You can say that agonia, or anxiety, is indeed a general state that a person feels, but it's not something that doesn't have any particular object. In fact, it does have particular objects. That's part of why it takes the form it does. Now, we can say that it's not a good state. As a matter of fact, it's actually a bad condition for a person to be in from the Stoic perspective, because you don't want to live a life full of anxiety. You want to live an untroubled existence. That's the goal. And so, insofar as you are feeling anxiety, things are not where they need to be. And insofar as other people are feeling anxieties about things, they're not going to be good guideposts for us, as he's going to tell us in this chapter. So the key questions then are, why do we feel anxiety? What causes us to feel anxiety as human beings? And then how can we avoid it? Because it is something that the Stoics would say is to be chosen against, right? It is something that it does make sense for us to have an aversion towards. Anxiety itself is a kind of being averse to things, fearing them, but we want to bring to bear a kind of aversion on that and to desire the state of untroubledness or tranquility that is indeed possible for us. So why do we feel anxiety? Epictetus says that it stems from a kind of ignorance. And it's not just an ignorance of particulars, it's ignorance about important things. So, for example, he'll say that if we're anxious about how our performance is going to turn out because we're caring about what the crowd thinks, we're feeling that and we're thinking that in part because we don't really understand the nature of crowds and how mercurial they are, and the fact that their opinion doesn't really count for much in the grand scheme of things. And perhaps we do have that knowledge, but it's not active and usable at the time that we're doing it, so we feel anxiety. We could be ignorant of all sorts of things, the nature of the genuine good for ourselves, how reliable things are, and so these can cause us to feel anxiety. And anxiety takes the form, Epictetus is very clear about this, of feeling fear, of feeling a sense of fear about things, that bad things are going to happen to us, or that good things that we already possess, that we think are good, are going to be taken away. It's a consciousness of our vulnerability, not necessarily the fact that we are going to get hurt or we are going to lose something, but the possibility of that for us. And so anxiety is really a complex of affect and cognitions at the same time that are all fused together in one. This is the way the Stoics indeed regard emotions and emotional responses. So he brings it back to this distinction, as he's going to over and over again in his works. What is in our power? What is not in our power? The things that are in our power, we actually have control over, and those are the things that fall within the scope of our faculty of choice, our moral purpose. That's where our genuine good and our genuine bad lies. The things that are not in our power, we don't have control over them. They are not actually good or evil for us, although we often get mixed up and think that they are. So, what can we make of this? Well, we don't have to be anxious about what's in our power. And here's an interesting thing to think about. Why don't we have to be anxious about what's in our power? Well, because it's in our power. We actually have control over it. Now, saying that to some people who aren't very sure of themselves, or who have come to realize just how messed up their habits and their emotions and their thoughts about things really are, which can be, a step of progress, right? People like that can say, man, I don't know if I'm going to be up to dealing with the stuff that's in front of me. I'm worried about how I'm going to react. For example, when you go into a situation, going into a conversation, for example, that you can't avoid, where you know that the other person is going to be a real pain and try to push your buttons, and you think to yourself, no, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to handle this, or if I'm going to blow up at them and lose my temper and say something I'll regret later. I'll give in to the impulse of anger, right? Epictetus would say, you don't actually have to be anxious about that because it really does lie within your power. Insofar as you are anxious about that, there's probably something else going on that you want to take a close look at. Perhaps you're still allowing some considerations from the outside to intrude that you don't really have control over, or perhaps you're misunderstanding just how much control, not total control, of course, but the measure of control that you do have over your own responses. So we don't need to be anxious about things that we actually have control over. We can, you might say, trust ourselves. It's a very liberating message. We also shouldn't be anxious about the things that don't lie within our power. Why not? Because we don't have control over them. And you might say, well, that doesn't really answer things, because doesn't that mean I have to be even more afraid that other people are going to screw me over, or bad things are going to happen to me at random, or whatever plans I make are going to fall through, or whatever desires I have are not going to be realized? And Epictetus says, well, yes, if you are desiring, if you're letting your desire just go scurry around in the world and latch on to whatever sort of thing you think is out there that's going to make you happy, you're probably going to be unhappy, and bad things, these bad things in your viewpoint are going to happen to you. They're not actually bad things in themselves. Remember, he says that it's not the things themselves or the events themselves, it's our viewpoint on them that makes them good or bad. So if we allow ourselves to be fearful about things that are not in our power, we're actually kind of messing ourselves up, and we really shouldn't do that. We have a choice about whether we feel anxiety. Now, he's got this really fascinating discussion that he comes back to several times in the course of this chapter about what skill or expertise does for us. And he talks about this in several other places as well. He actually begins the chapter with this. He says, when I see a man in anxiety, I ask him, I say to myself, what can it be that this fellow wants? Right? And we'll come back to that. For if he did not want something that was outside of his control, how could he still remain in anxiety? This is why the musician, literally the kitharod, but who has kitharods these days? Think a guitar player, right? Some guitar player gets up and he's going to do a performance, or a piano player, or what have you, right? So the musician, when doing their work all alone, they don't have any anxiety. When they're practicing, when they are getting ready for the performance and the crowd hasn't come in yet, they're not feeling anxious yet. But when he enters the theater, even though he has a very beautiful voice and plays the instrument admirably, he becomes anxious. Well, why? What's provoking this anxiety? Well, Epictetus tells us that the skill allows us to have a reliable expectation that we're going to perform okay. We're going to perform according to the standards of whatever it is that we've learned. So, if we're engaged in some sort of athletic competition, we've done all of our drills, we can count on our body to do what we want. Music is a lot of repetition and practice. Epictetus actually says at another point, go to a music lesson. Really, really boring stuff, but very necessary if you want to learn how to play music well. Similarly for public speaking, similarly for lecturing in front of a class, right? You have to learn your topic, and then you have to think about how you're going to speak about it well, and all those sorts of things. The subject matter expert, the person who has a skill or an expertise, can expect that they're all things being equal, they're going to perform well. What they don't have control over is how other people are going to take that performance, how the other people are going to react. And insofar as they're being anxious, they're concerned about how the other people are viewing them, which is very unpredictable. You can do a great performance and people can still boo you and write nasty things about you in their reviews. Look at YouTube, you can do a video that's great and people can, this sucks, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, sometimes I get, why is he wearing that tie, maybe he should cut his hair. And if you take those sorts of things to heart, you're going to have a very rough time. I often give students this advice when they are beginning their work as academic writers. I say, get used to rejection letters because you're going to see a lot of them as you send your work out. And quite often, the people who are giving you the rejection letters are actually making snap judgments. The dirty little secret about peer review is that many times it's not actually blind, and quite often it's not really review. And sometimes an editor will say, we got too many papers, find some reason to send this one away. Reviewers wait until the last minute before they write their reviews, and they're hasty. Some reviewers are just jerks and don't like anybody else doing well. This is the sort of thing that I tell students, in part because I know that they have the chops to actually write a paper, but I don't know whether they have the fortitude to stick it out through having people, punching you right where it counts, not in the family jewels, but rather in your heart, saying your work is no good, right? So that's the sort of thing that makes people, even experts, quite anxious. And Epictetus redirects things by saying, you don't actually understand what the meaning of the crowd is. They don't know anything. They don't know any more than you do. So why do you care about their opinion? Key question here is, what is being incorrectly assumed as goods or evils? What is the person mixed up about? Whenever we feel anxiety, that's what's going on. We're mixed up about something. So he says, for example, do I care to please you? What do I gain thereby? For do you know the standards according to which man is judged by man? Have you been concerned to know what a good man is and what an evil man, and how each becomes what he is? Why then are you not a good man yourself? How do you make out, he answers, that I'm not a good man? Well, no good man grieves or groans, no good man laments, no good man turns pale or trembles or asks, how will he receive me? How will he listen to me? And Epictetus says, the other guy is going to receive you or listen to you as seems best to him, not necessarily according to the standards of your performance. It's going to depend on how they feel that day, or what other things are going on in their life, or whether they like you already or dislike you already, or whether they read a review that says that they should applaud you, or read a review that says the opposite. So it's not something that you should be particularly concerned about. And here's the other thing that he points out. He says, is it possible for one man to make the mistake and for another to suffer the harm? No. Why then are you anxious over what is not your own? If you are anxious over things that another person controls, or that is, just a matter of blind causality or random events happening the way that they do, you are making a mistake, Epictetus would say. So anxiety is always stemming from some sort of error or some ignorance about the way things really are. And then it leads to fears that we feel, which can then paralyze us, which then can lead us into lines of reasoning that are not particularly good for us and keep us from realizing our genuine good.